welcome everyone who's tuned in for today's Jewish Gen Talk with Sarina Roffé. My name is Avraham Grohl. I serve as Executive Director of JewishGen.org. We are glad to welcome all of you who are returning, who have been with us for all of our Jewish Gen Talks throughout the series. And for anyone new, welcome. We hope that you will enjoy today's webinar and participate in future and upcoming programs. Today we are happy to host Sarina Roffé, who will talk about post-1492 Sephardic dispersion and a guide to Sephardic genealogy. Sarina is a well-respected expert on genealogy, Sephardic genealogy, and Sephardic history, and she will provide an overview of Sephardic Jewry and post-1492 dispersion to begin the discussion on researching your own Sephardic genealogy. She'll talk about where to begin, interview techniques, what you can access online, books and various sources for research will be shared. Sarina has a very long and distinguished career researching. She's very well known in the field when it comes to Sephardic genealogy. Recently, she became a research director at JewishGen, in addition to everything else she does, and she's trying to help us spearhead that division to focus on Sephardic roots. And as an aside, we are working on some very significant projects and collections that we will be announcing in the coming months. So stay tuned as we continue to focus on Sephardic research. A couple of notes: this session will be recorded as always. When it is, we will post an announcement on the Jewish Gen discussion group to let you know that it's available on our YouTube channel. If you are tuning in on Facebook, welcome, glad you're with us. The recording will also be available on our Facebook page, facebook.com/JewishGen.org. If you're watching on the Jewish Genealogy portal, welcome. Again, you'll be able to access the video via Facebook. If you're not on the discussion group, please sign up. It's a tremendous way to connect with people from around the world. You can easily do so by visiting our homepage, JewishGen.org, and clicking on Connect right there on the main screen. So again, glad you're with us. Without any further ado, I pass it over to Sarina.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm really delighted to see people from so many different places. I'm a little overwhelmed by it. I'm going to start by sharing my screen and starting the presentation. So I hope, can everybody see that? Avrami, give me a thumbs up if this is working.
Yes, we can see your screen, but you might want to put it into view the slideshow.
Slideshow, okay. Like that, okay. Can you see it now?
Yes, that's perfect.
Okay, great. Okay, so as Avrami said, I'm Sarina Roffé. I started doing genealogy really when I was a little girl because my mother would always walk in the streets and she'd say, oh, we'd go to a simcha and she would say, this is my cousin so-and-so, and this is my cousin so-and-so. And while I knew all of my 52 first cousins, I didn't know her cousins or my father's cousins. And it turned out we were from this mammoth family, and and I needed to understand how I was related to all these different people. So I started making these little charts. And it grew into a career. It grew into a lifetime interest in genealogy. There's a long list of things here that I work on or have been involved with. Added to this, of course, is the Sephardic Research Chair at JewishGen. I was on the board of the IAJGS. I am no longer, so that should be corrected here. These are some of my books. I've written 2 cookbooks and a book called Branching Out from Sepharad, which outlines the history of Jews from Spain to Syria to the Americas. I also run a nonprofit called Sephardic Heritage Project, where we try and find records from different sources around the world, rabbinic sources and things like that, and from that cull or derive genealogical records. And a lot of those records have been placed on JewishGen. these are some of the projects that we've done. We've translated and databased marriage and Brit Milah records. We've acquired databases of cemetery records from Mexico, Venezuela, Cuba, Argentina. Recently, we did Bogota, Colombia, working with their new genealogical society. We just finished the Philadelphia cemeteries. We're getting ready to send that off to Jobar. And we have records now from the Moroccan community in Buenos Aires, and we're working on some Alliance records. So lots of things that we're doing to try and make as much as possible available in terms of Sephardic records. And of course, I'm one of many researchers who have been doing this. I frequently get questions about why I'm so into doing family trees. And I think that roots are very, very important because it connects as we as individuals have our families, our children, our grandchildren, knowing where we come from helps connect us, our grandchildren, to those previous generations. And it's not just that genealogy is kind of in now, it's that I truly believe that this all needs to be documented in some way. Right now, I'm working with a family from Singapore, and the families are all over the world. And while they have bits and pieces, no one connected them to each other. And they're so grateful that there's going to be some written history of their family. I don't know if people are aware that in the Torah, we have 477 genealogies. You know, if you go to services, you might read in English, so-and-so begets so-and-so begets so-and-so. So it's a really important value to be able to have those genealogies and to write it down. A little background and history. So I wanted to start with Jews in Muslim Spain so that we have an understanding of why we have so many issues with Sephardic genealogy in terms of really navigating it and documenting it. So understand that Jews first went to Spain during the Umayyad dynasty, mostly from the Middle East. They followed the Umayyad dynasty to Spain. And in the 10th and 11th centuries, it was considered the golden age of Spain. It was a time when important works were presented. It was a time when Hasdai ibn Shakruk was a Jew in the court of the dynasty. He was the officially recognized leader. He was a patron of Jewish learning. And he led and defended the Spanish Jewish community in Islamic Spain. And there's really been no other time period, even since then, that has compared in terms of what Jews have been able to produce. We know that during the 11th century, it was an important time for Jewish philosophy. Poetry reached a peak. There was a Sephardic school on the Talmud. Maimonides lived during this time period, and it's when he wrote that code of Jewish law. Important commentaries were written during that time. And like I said, this time period was never equaled in terms of Jewish scholarship. Then we go to Christian Spain, and it's a whole other different story. So we know today of Spain as one united kingdom, but back then it wasn't. There were Muslim parts and there were Christian parts. And 1391 is a critical time period because there were the equivalent of pogroms. There were mobs were incited all over. There were murders, Jews that were forced to convert to Catholicism, Jews who were tricked into returning to their homes by the King Pedro of Valencia. He said, you won't be molested. The synagogues weren't to be burned. And then he turned around and he confiscated their property and he had them murdered. Barcelona, which is where 400 years there had been, Jews had lived peacefully. There were attacks instigated by the Castilians that were part of the massacres from Seville and Valencia. 10,000 Jews were killed, it's estimated, just in that particular quarter. In 1393, we have King John of Castile. He prohibited conversos from living or eating in the same quarter as unconverted Jews. And so if you were a new Christian, you could not openly, there was a lot of fear of hate and rioting, even to conversos. And what we essentially saw was, even though people converted, they weren't treated as if they were Christians because they weren't born Christian. So you had this separation between Jews who were born Christian, old Christians, and new Christians. And that becomes really evident in the century that follows. And I'm going to come back to 1391 later because it becomes really critical in our thinking about those who converted. And you understand that I use the term conversos. I don't use the term Moreno. I don't use any other term but converso, because in many cases, you don't know if people converted voluntarily. While many were coerced into conversion, we don't know who was forced and who wasn't. Sometimes you might see that term Anusim, but again, or B'nai Anusim, children of the forced. And that's because there were many who were forced, but today we don't know who those people are. So I just use a more generic term of converso. We know that in 1469, King Ferdinand of Aragon married Queen Isabella of Castile. They were married in Valladolid, united their kingdoms. They were first cousins from the house of Trastamara, and I may not be saying that right, which was the reigning royal house in Castile, Aragon, and Portugal. So it wasn't long because they united their kingdoms that they were able to push the Moors out of Granada in the south. So remember I talked about this idea of new Christians versus those who were born Christian. While the Inquisition began in 1481 to target new Christians who were not true to the faith, it didn't target Jews. That's a misnomer. It targeted new Christians, who we as Jews think of as Jews, but new Christians, people who had converted officially, and they were given a separate status from those who were born Christian. And laws were passed called Limpia de Sangre. And it basically meant that you had different rights as a new Christian than you did as a born Christian. It was their form of segregation. And because think about it, let's say you converted, but your brother didn't convert. Are you not going to go to his wedding or his kid's wedding or his kid's bar mitzvah? That's not going to happen. You still have the same familial ties. Or maybe a husband converts and a wife doesn't. So and you may not have moved. You're living in the same neighborhood. So your neighbors are still the same, but you still have the same social circle, except yesterday you were going to synagogue and tomorrow you're going to church. So you think about it psychologically, it was not as difficult to convert, but it was more difficult from a social standpoint to separate yourself from a community you had grown up with. So in 1492, Ferdinand and Isabella issue the Edict of Expulsion, the Alhambra Decree. And it basically says that Jews had to either convert or leave Castile and all of their territories by July 31st, 1492. The date changed. It was it became August 2nd, which was the actual date, and it actually coincides with the destruction of the first and second temple. It's the same Jewish date, and the date that Columbus sails to America with several conversos on his ship. The Edict of Expulsion was not reversed and revoked until 1968, following the Second Vatican Council. So this is the Alhambra Decree. You can see that it has a seal. I got this right off the internet. Nothing fancy here. So now, where did everybody go? So it's estimated that about half of them, I'm going to say about 60,000, went to Portugal. Now, why do they go to Portugal? Portugal needs an economy. They have no middle class, and they need the tradespeople from Spain. So they open their arms and they say, please come. And it's easy for people to go across the border into Portugal. The Ottoman Empire also opens its arms and says, come to the Ottoman Empire. And so many disperse into the Ottoman Empire. They also go to North Africa. There is a significant number that go first to Italy, to Livorno and that area. Eventually, those from Livorno also make it into the Ottoman Empire, but at the beginning, for the first, I want to say, century, they stop over in Livorno. Livorno is known as a publishing area, but it was also very friendly to the Jews at the time. And of course, then you have many, many, many that go underground. They're conversos, but they go underground and they live in these small border towns between Spain and Portugal. If you've read Jeannie Milgram's book or you've heard Jeannie Milgram speak, she talks about these little towns, and I've seen some of them myself. I've been to Portugal a few times giving presentations, and you can see these tiny little synagogues in many of these border towns where people lived secretly. So this is a map that shows, and again, I got this off the internet, I didn't create this, but it shows the migration of the Spanish Jews and kind of where they settle. So the earliest migrations are those in red. So you see them, and ironically, it should show the arrow going into Portugal. I'm not sure why that's not red, but it should be. But you see them going to Italy, you see them going to North Africa, Morocco, Iran, Algeria, Tunisia, and then up into Venice, and then across Mediterranean into the Middle East in what's now Egypt, what's now Israel, what's now Lebanon, and Syria and Turkey. Now, Syria actually wasn't part of the Ottoman Empire until 1516. So, and the expulsion was in 1492. So this map is really very, 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 very telling. Later migrations are those in black, where you can see those people from Portugal end up going into the Netherlands, and we'll talk about that later. So those people that went to Portugal, it was not all glory, because a new king comes in, Manuel, and he becomes engaged to marry Ferdinand and Isabella's daughter. A condition of that marriage was actually the expulsion of Jews from Portugal, because the king and queen said, you got to get rid of those Jews before you can marry our daughter. So he gathers all the Jews at the port of Lisbon and in different town squares. He's got his expulsion order, but he doesn't let them leave. He forcibly converts every Jew in Portugal. Worse than that, he takes their children from them, and he sends them to San Miguel Island, where most of them die. In 1536, the Portuguese Inquisition starts, and descendants of those Jews who had converted in Spain back in 1391 are now under suspicion, because many of them had gone to Portugal and were living secretly in Portugal. And then you find that crypto Jews, or conversos, leave Portugals for places that are more lenient legislatively, such as Holland, and opportunities for their unique skill sets. So the Dutch becomes really one of the favorite places for Sephardic Jews because a lot of the refugees are traders. They need a port city. And Amsterdam benefited economically from having them there. So under the influence of Sephardic Jews, Amsterdam grows. And you have to understand, it's a whole century that they had no connection with Rabbinic Judaism. So it takes a while for that reconnection. They're collectively Jewish, they are culturally Jewish, but they haven't had a connection to Rabbinic Judaism, to Kashrut, to Shabbat, things like that. A lot of them go to Brazil because a lot of Europeans spoke Portugal, and they know that Brazil has Portuguese speaking people. And the Dutch leave Spain in 1591. They had been a Republic of Spain. So now after 1591, things start to open up for the Jews. So Amsterdam, there was a lot of religious tolerance there, and there are a lot of discriminatory laws that were in other parts of Europe that were not in Amsterdam. And they weren't always so strict about how they enforced things. So the toleration in Amsterdam allowed the economic assets of the Portuguese community to thrive. And they continued to call themselves the Portuguese community. The Amsterdam officials were less, I want to say, stereotyping. They weren't stereotyping the Jewish community. They didn't have that negative perceived history and Christian tradition. And the Jews of Amsterdam had much more freedom in their everyday life. So it was really a place that they wanted to live. This is a photo. They established 3 congregations, which all merged in 1639. This is the Portuguese Jewish congregation. You could go visit it. They have tours if you're in Amsterdam. We know that this congregation produced rabbis, scholars, philosophers, Baruch Spinoza, who's excommunicated, but many leading international trade houses. So the Dutch had holdings in the Americas, and so people from the Netherlands went to the Americas because the Dutch had holdings there, specifically Recife, Brazil, where they had sugar plantations. They also went to the Antilles, they went to Curacao, they went to Willemstad, they went to, while the Netherlands was having some economic difficulties, they went to the New World. People went to the New World because then they could follow economic opportunity. So you see from this map, and again, this is not my map, it's attributed here to the source. You can see all of the places that they went in the Americas and when they went. So they went from England, they went to Jamaica, they went down to Brazil, they went to Curacao, and of course we know about New York in 1654, and then Quebec. So little history on Curacao. Their community dates from the 1650s, and their land for the synagogue was purchased in 1674. It's known as Snoa, which is short for Esnoga, which is the Portuguese and Ladino word for synagogue. Mikveh Israel is the oldest synagogue in the Western Hemisphere in continuous use. It was established in 1732. Today it's Reconstructionist, but it was modeled after that synagogue in the Netherlands. It has a sand-colored floor, which reminds its ancestors of their being on the Iberian Peninsula and of the covered floors in their prayer houses that muffled their footsteps. The cemetery there is the oldest Jewish cemetery still in continuous use in the Western Hemisphere. There are Dutch ruins in the Caribbean on St. Eustatius and Suriname. There's a synagogue there. They're no longer in use, unlike the Curacao synagogue, which is in continuous use. We know that the Dutch West Indies Company settled into Itamarco. They did two invasions. It's located just north of Recife. And by 1634, the Dutch had taken control of Recife. And as I said, it had a lot of sugar plantations. There were many Jews that lived there. There was a Jewish pirate who applied to bring an organized group of Sephardic colonists to Brazil, and they arrived in 1635. There were a large number of new Christians in Recife. They had their synagogue, but the Dutch lost Recife in 1654, so the Jews had to leave. And that's why that ship sails to New Amsterdam in 1654. So they arrive by ship. There's 23 of them. Others are going other places, some returning back to Europe. Peter Stuyvesant denies them permission to enter the city, but they write to the Dutch West Indies Company, which gives them access. Why? Because the Dutch West Indies Company is controlled by Jews. They establish a cemetery and a congregation known today as She'ereth Israel. And from She'ereth Israel, we have Touro Synagogue, we have other synagogues, because relatives, again, commerce and port cities are established. We have Mikveh Israel in Savannah, Georgia, and Mikveh Israel in Philadelphia, all of which are early American Sephardi synagogues. So let's go back to the migration from, and we know that, as I had mentioned before, they went to the Middle East, they went to Amsterdam, they went to Americas. We know that in the Americas, the Inquisition follows them, so they go underground. So conversos that are in South America escape by moving north through Mexico, through Central America, through Mexico, into New Mexico and America. And we know this because today via DNA, there are remnants of conversos from hundreds of years ago who escaped during using this path. Shelley Dardashti is an expert in this particular area. So I call it Inquisition migration. And this is basically the map showing how people would have gone from, I don't know if you could see my little pointer, they would have gone from South America, wherever they settled, up through Central America, into Mexico, and into the Americas. So let's now switch to Sephardic genealogy and talk about that. I always tell people start with what you know. Sometimes people will come to me, they will say to me, okay, but I know I had this relative from 200 years ago, how do I connect with them? And I say, well, you have to start with the present and then work your way back. So it's great that you know that you might be a descendant of this person, but we need to connect you to that, especially those people who want to apply for Portuguese citizenship under the law allowing that. So I tell people, record what you know. Get a program like Family Tree Maker or one of the genealogy programs. Put in your names, your dates, who the person married. Dates are important. Places are important. When did people get married? When were they born? Where were they born? Fill in the tree with as much as you know. Even if you don't know every date, sometimes what happens is then you'll link maybe the Ancestry or MyHeritage, and with Ancestry, those leaves pop up and you suddenly are finding information you may not even have known existed. Ask questions. So you want to ask your elders, start with the oldest people in your family. And lots of times what I find is it's not necessarily the question, it's the way you ask the question. It's about triggering a memory Why did they emigrate? What do they know about their grandparents? Were their occupations, were their accomplishments? What was their experience in immigration if you have a relative that was actually immigrated? Did someone sponsor them? How did they earn a living? How much money did they have in their pocket when they got here? Find out about family values and traditions. Like sometimes many Sephardic Jews light an extra candle at Hanukkah. Where did that tradition come from? In my family, we have a tradition where we have a shawl that's been handed down in our family for almost 200 years now, and it's worn at every Brit Milah by the woman that carries the baby to the mohel. So there are traditions like that. Every family has them. And you want to write those down. And they may seem insignificant, but knowing about them really is helpful. I like to ask about the politics. So I know, for example, with Syrian Jews and a lot of Middle East Jews, when the Ottoman Empire ended, because they lived as dhimmi, they were protected. They didn't have to serve in the military. But in 1908, when the Ottoman Empire fell, dhimmi status ended. And that meant that Jews had to start serving in the military and they were being conscripted. And that meant people were sending their sons to America. It was an impetus. It was a reason that people started to immigrate. Even economy was bad, but that was really more of a reason why people would have emigrated. Find the box. So every family, I don't care who you are, has a box of photos, of documents. Maybe it's in a shopping bag, maybe it's a box in the basement, maybe it's in the top of the closet. You have old photo albums. You want to find those photos, you want to scan them, you want to identify who's in them, and you want to use those to support your family tree. I was doing my husband's family tree many years ago, and we found the box and we were identifying and scanning, and we found this one photo of a person we didn't know who she was. And she had this getup and this stern face and this wrap around her hair. And my son got an email and he said, this woman said, my name is Francia, and my grandfather was Simon Roffé, and he was from Tangier, and he was in the tobacco business, and he had 3 daughters, Sada, Pauline, and Flora. And I'm thinking to myself, well, my father-in-law has 2 sisters, Flora and Pauline. His father was from Tangier, and he was in tobacco. And this is way too many coincidences for us not to be related. And as it turned out, she had that same photo in her box, but on the back of her photo was the name of the person. And it turned out to be my husband's great-grandmother. So you never know. Those photos really do mean something. If you can find any Jewish documents, ketubot, Brit Milah, marriage records, anything like that, they will give you information about the family. I did my own family recently, and I looked at directories. And I hadn't really considered directories much of a source until then. And then I realized my grandparents moved every year from 1910 to 1920. Every single year, they were in a different directory. And I was like, what's the deal? And then my husband told me that in his family, the reason they all moved was because you got a free month's rent if you moved and you took a new lease. So just a funny story, but I had all these addresses and I was like, what's the deal? I mean, they had a lot of kids to be moving that much, but if they could save a month's rent, that was good. That was a good reason to. I personally do not recommend inputting data directly onto a website. I like to use a program and then connect that program to Ancestry or MyHeritage or whatever. because you can upload it from there, and then you have more versatility in terms of charts, in terms of exporting a JEDCOM, downloading the data in different ways. My preference, but that's my recommendation. For example, I did this little tree just to show you, I could make the women female. I could make the edges rounded. I can make the men blue or purple or green or whatever. I could change fonts. I can decide if I want to include years in the box, or if I want to leave the boxes empty. I could do it as a book. I could do it as a poster. There's a lot of versatility when you're using a program. I would also look at your surname. Look at your maternal and your paternal surnames. And in many countries, if you're Sephardic, you had a double surname. So a double surname provides answers to discrepancies in your family. For example, I had a family where the brother and sister had two different surnames. And it's because their surname in the old country was Shabbat Levi. So the wife took the name Shabbat, the sister took the name Shabbat when she came to America, and the brother took the name Levi when he came to America. So look at that double surname, because lots of times if you're looking at the databases, let's say the Brit Milah database on JewishGen, you'll find that the double surname is listed, but you have to look at both surnames. And analyze if your family followed Sephardic naming patterns. So most Sephardim, not all, but most, follow a naming tradition where the first son and the first daughter are named for the paternal grandparents, and the second son and second daughter are named for the maternal grandparents, whether alive or dead, because we believe in honoring our parents. So it doesn't matter if they're alive or dead, they're going to get the same name. And that means that all 9 of my father's siblings, there were 10 children in his family, all of them had a Joseph because my grandfather's name was Joseph. And yes, it does get a little crazy when we're at a wedding, when you call the name Joey. Online databases that we know are available, obviously state and federal censuses. IGRA has the Montefiore. There's also the Syrian community has a database called SY Hebra, which I'll show you when we go to databases. Immigration, naturalization, military records. If you want to subscribe to Fold 3, you can find lots of great stuff. Voter registration records, many, many, many types of records. If you look at, I would tell you that if you find an index for a naturalization of a relative and you can't find the application for naturalization, reach out on the JewishGen group, the email group, because what you'll find is that people will answer you and help you find the application for naturalization. I have found many, 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 many times that people did not come under the name that I knew them as. For example, my grandmother's name was Frida Sha'alo, spelled S-H-A-A-L-O. That's always the way I knew it, but she came under the name Frida Shema, S-C-H-M-A. I never would have found it. And then it finally made sense because the double surname in Syria was Sha'alo Shema. And I would have spelled Shema as S-H-A-M-A-H, but they spelt it probably transliterating it as S-C-H-M-A from the Hebrew. And so I never would have found it. But that little number on the index card for her naturalization led me to the application, which helped me find the name she came under and then her ship record. So those kinds of clues you don't want to miss out on. And I can tell you that the listserv on JewishGen has been really invaluable in that. So let me give you some examples of things you can find in records. This is a record from a client I had named and Joe Cohen. He was missing, but we find out that he died of a heart attack, and that hypertension, and that he was a peddler. He was 26 years old when he died. It tells me his father's name, tells me his mother's maiden name. So lots of really, really good information, where he died and where he's buried. This is for someone named Abraham Misri, who ironically has the same name as my father, but this is not my father. I have a description of what he looked like. I have that he was a peddler. So you see here it says Turkey, but it says Syria. So one of the things that I found in a lot of records is Syria could be written as Turkey. It could be written as Halab. It could be written as a number of different things. Languages sometimes are Hebrew, sometimes are French. It tells me where he worked. Okay, this is a registration card. And it tells me that his parents are in Turkey. This is my grandfather's registration card for the World War I draft. And it tells me how old he is. It tells, so now here you see where were you born? Aleppo's with 2 L's, but Turkey. He's a salesman. It tells me he worked for I. Shalom and Company and the location of that. And here's his residence here's his residence as 110 Delancey Street. And it tells me he's born February 15th, 1889. Now, what you have to know is no one in Syria knew when they were born. I did find his Brit Milah record, and it turns out he was born August 29th, 1889. He didn't really know when he was born because they didn't have birth records. You only had records of the community. And at this point, he has a wife and 2 children. So my father was born in 1918. This is probably about 1917. This is his registration card for the World War II draft, and he's 52. They had an old man's draft. And here it's telling me where he's working, where they lived, another address. And you notice the date is different, June 12th, 1889, and where he was working. This is my father's birth certificate. So my father, my entire life, was born October 4th, 1918. This says 1919. My entire life, I only found this about a year ago. It also says, gives another address. So I know that in 1919, they're living on Roebling Street, which is in Williamsburg. Now, it says his mother's name is Frida Misri, and his mother's name is Charlotte. Now, his mother's name was not Charlotte, okay? So we were trying to figure out, as a family, where Charlotte came from, because it's not on any of his siblings' birth certificates either. So we figured that my grandmother probably was in the hospital and tried to tell her Sha'alo, and they wrote Charlotte. Have no clue. Okay, so this is one of the community leaders in my community. His name was Isaac Shalom, and his family was writing a book on him, and they asked me to find his ship record. Not find it for anything. And finally, using that little number on his index card for his naturalization, I was able to find his application for naturalization, on which he wrote, this is his petition, and he writes, formally Isaac Shalom, C-H-A-L-O-N, and Isaac, I-S-A-K. Was I ever going to find that? Not a chance, not a chance. And it tells me also what ship he's on. So now I can go and find his ship record, okay? But it gets better. The witnesses, right? So look at these witnesses. This is Joseph Asher, okay? He's someone in the community who happened to be the secretary for the company that he worked at. And this name is in my community today, both of these names. So things you need to know, Sephardic sources for genealogy. I'm actually going to take you to a different screen now before, and then come back to this. So hold on, because I'm going to share a different screen. Oh, I know. I have to. I think I have to come out of this presentation to do that. New share. Let's do that. Okay. Okay, I hope you can see this.
Yes, we can see it.
You can see this?
Yes.
Okay. So I want to show you some of the websites that I find that I go to often when I'm looking for Sephardic information. So one of them is farhi.org, and this is the home screen. It's pretty easy to navigate. You can put in a last name. I'll put in a name that I know, and it comes up. You do the search, comes up with all kinds of information. So let's say I choose this person, Bobby Dweck. There's no other information on it. I can go to Barbara. Maybe there's more information. So now it's telling me who her parents are. Okay, and if I click on it, it gives me different screens that I can go to. So this is a great source of family tree information. I will tell you it's not 100% accurate, because these are contributed trees. Much like Ancestry are contributed trees, you will find some mistakes. Okay, let's see. Can you see this, Avrami?
I still see the main page. I still see the main page.
Okay, so let's new share. How's that?
No, same thing.
Same thing. Okay, so let me stop share and start share again. Okay, so this is the website of Sephardic Heritage Project. And what I wanted to show you was that if you go to resources, what I've listed here, and the reason I don't do this as a handout and I do it this way is because I find that this way you will, I can constantly go in and change and update. But if I click Sephardic Genealogy websites, you will find a plethora of websites from different countries, different people, different, you know, for example, here's the Portuguese archives, the Montefiore census, Sephardic Ancestry, Sephardic Heritage Project, Sephardic Genealogy, Miriam Weiner's collection at Yeshiva University, the Spanish archives, JewishGen databases, which have many, many, many Sephardic databases, and I don't want to give it up, but they hopefully will be getting more soon. Jews of Morocco. There's a Damascus database now that's in Hebrew. The Moroccan cemetery databases. Not all of the databases. I love Jobar, but there are many cemeteries that are not on Jobar that we're trying to convince to come into Jobar. Avutenu has some great lists. There's an association from the Jews of Spain, of Aragon. So you want to look at those. You also want to look at Facebook groups. I will tell you that the Facebook groups are terrific for answering questions. The JewishGen portal and Tracing the Tribe are probably my top two, but there are many, many other Facebook groups that you might want to join, or, you know, there are also a list of books here of genealogical interest. This one is my favorite, the Dictionary of Sephardic Surnames. I could tell you the Livorno Kedubot just came out about 6 months ago. Fabulous source of information, just fabulous source of information. So these are some of the, I just wanted to point this one out to you. Obviously, JewishGen, JoBar has a great registry. And what I like about JoBar is that you can look at the cemeteries that are in JoBar. So like this contents of the database will show you all of the cemeteries, the countries that they're in. And you can see that there's many that would be of Sephardic interest, like Brazil. Most of the many Jews in Brazil would have been Sephardic. It tells you which of the cemeteries, tells you where they're located, how many burials there are. So fabulous source of information. And then I'm going to point you to Sephardic Gen. They have databases by country. So see here by country. But if you don't know where to look in the database, what I find good is if you go to the consolidated index and you put in the name. Okay, so here I'll start with Dweck again. And you search that. It will tell you which database to look at for the information. Okay, so just something to look at. I am going to go back to my PowerPoint now. Oops. Okay, are you seeing the PowerPoint now?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, so I've listed a lot of these here. These are ones that are specific to Portugal, Amsterdam, and Brazil. For North Africa and the Middle East, these are ones that I recommend, websites that I recommend. Again, farhi.org, Sephardic Gen, which is databases by country, but they also have info files. What we're trying to do is get more people to do Kehila links in JewishGen. So I've been reaching out to people to try and get them to write them for JewishGen. So we have those, you know, those information files about specific countries. Cemetery database of Morocco is really interesting. And the European Sephardic Institute has some wonderful stuff. I would join Facebook groups. You can find lots and lots of answers on Facebook, and you'll get answers pretty quickly. The JewishGen portal and Tracing the Tribe are my favorites, but there are many others. These are some books. This is the Ketubot Registry of Livorno. It's new, fabulous book, and very well done. In fact, it won an award last year as a new publication for IHAGS. There's also Matilda Terger and Yitzhak Karem wrote this book on Guide to Sephardi and Mizrahi Genealogy in Israel. There's also a guide to Sephardic genealogy that I should have on this list by Jeff Malka. Fabulous guide, but things are changing every day, which is why I prefer having this information on a website. Alex Bader is really a top person when it comes to Jewish surnames. Sorry about that mistake. I shouldn't have by twice there. And these are some of my books. Just wanted to point them out. They're all on Amazon.com. This is a book about Jews from Spain to Syria to the Americas, and it follows the life of Rabbi Jacob Kasson, who was our chief rabbi. And if you don't want to buy cookbooks, we have an app called Sarina Sephardic Cuisine, and all the proceeds benefit Sephardic Heritage Project. I'm happy to answer any questions now and open this up for discussion.
Thank you, Sarina. I think you could stop sharing the screen for this part.
Okay.
And everyone, you can, first of all, there have been some questions about these resources. As Sarina mentioned, they're all available on her website, SephardicheRitage.org, where you can access everything that Sarina was just talking about. If there are any questions, you can post them in the Q&A section, and I'll read them out. First of all, here's a practical question. If people want to hire professional genealogists to do research, how would they do that?
There are several genealogists that specialize in Sephardic genealogists. I'm one of them. You should reach out to the Association of Professional Genealogists and see. I also know that Ancestry has a genealogy division, and I believe they have some people who specialize in Sephardic genealogy. So you want to have a professional, someone who has some credentials or at least has some history doing genealogy, even if they're not accredited. Obviously, someone accredited is better, but it doesn't have to be.
Okay, thank you. People are writing in questions. Thank you. But if you could please make them general in nature. It's hard to do things that are personal.
So I see one question that says, I noticed a slide that said there were few records in the Ottoman Empire. How do you find out about your family that went from Spain to Izmir and later to Poland? So again, you want to start from the present and move back. There are some Turkish records on Sephardic Gen. Many of the records from Izmir and Istanbul were pulled off the internet, but are available offline through a request that I believe you can put through on Sephardic Gen. The reason was because they were suffering from some discrimination. There are other records that have been culled by Sephardic Heritage Project and others through rabbinic records, Brit Milah records, marriage records, things like that that we found in the archives of Jerusalem as they've been pulled out of those countries. So we have to go in and literally manually database them. We have to, so for example, I just got records from Bogota, Colombia. I have a set of records now that is almost finished of marriage records from Buenos Aires, from the Moroccan community. And there's about, I want to say about 1,400 images. We have to look at each image and we have to pull out the English date, the Hebrew date, the father's name, the mother's name, the bride's name, the groom's name, any notes, the witnesses. So it's painstaking. And then it has to be proved by 2 other people before we'll release it because we want to make sure it's accurate. Sometimes the interpretation of one person is different than the interpretation of another person. I see a question. I have kin buried in Old Montefiore, who came from Minsk. May they be Sephardic? No known connection. So Montefiore, like many cemeteries, Jewish cemeteries, had burial societies. So a burial society would take a plot of land and that you would be attached to that burial society. So for example, there is a website called syhebra.com, which is the Syrian database in Brooklyn, New York. But that database covers many cemeteries. So they started with a plot in Montefiore. Then they were at United Hebrew, and they had several plots in United Hebrew. Now they just opened up in East Brunswick, a new plot in East Brunswick because they've outgrown United Hebrew in Staten Island. I'm just quickly seeing the ones that are going here. Family from Galicia. So there is a Galician group, and I believe that you should be in contact with the Galician group on JewishGen. Avrami, can you talk about the Galicia group?
I would refer, we do have records on Galicia, and if you do a database search, we also connect with records from a group called Gesher Galicia. The head of Gesher Galicia is Dr. Stephen Turner. And he actually gave a webinar for us a few weeks ago. You can find it on our YouTube channel to learn more about the work that they're doing.
Okay, I see Valerie Cruz is asking about Cartagena, Colombia. We don't have Cartagena yet, to my knowledge, but we would, if we could find somebody there that we could connect with, we could certainly work with that. Bassano, yes, Bassano is definitely a Sephardic name, as Balasano.
We're at the 3 o'clock mark, so we could do
Okay.
1 or 2 more questions.
Okay, I'm just looking here and to see. Sarah says, I have an Ottoman Empire document. I had it translate to find out who the person was. I assume it was a family member since I found it among my family papers. That would be great. I would love to see that. Is it feasible that Jews from Germany and France moved to the Netherlands and then to the Caribbean? Yes, anything is possible. Okay, I don't know if there's anything that anybody else says. Lois Gottman says it's an article in today's JTA about Jews from Cairo and Baghdad. I would love to read that.
And I'll on that note, I'll just mention that those the database of those names is also available on JewishGen. We thank Dr. Jacob Rosen for sharing it with us. And with that, I'm going to say thank you, Sarina, for this very enlightening and informative presentation. The website is SephardicHeritage.org.
SephardicHeritageProject.org.
SephardicHeritageProject.org. And we hope you will visit the site, look at the fabulous resources Sarina has put together. As a reminder, this session has been recorded, and we will make it accessible on our YouTube channel, and we'll post a message on our discussion group when it's live. We have a number of upcoming talks. Next week, we'll have a presentation by Dr. Alexander Bader, who has given a number of presentations for us over the past half a year. His topic will be on the Jews of Portugal. So we will send out a link about that today or tomorrow. So please register. And once again, thank you all for joining us. Thank you, Sarina, and have a wonderful rest of the day.
Thank you for having me. Have a great day.